Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. Today at the roundtable, I'll be your host. I'm Nathan, and we also have Dr. David Salas with us, and he is 1 week away from his wedding day. So by the time this releases, he'll be a married man. So excited for your wedding week. You guys feeling ready?
I think so. We put a lot of legwork into it up front, made sure to dot our I's, cross our T's. Now it's kind of just cleaning up small things and just focusing on enjoying the day. So I think for the most part, we're pretty much there.
Great. Excited for you. So today on the podcast, we are opening up the mailbag. We have gathered a bunch of questions from you all, and we're excited to dive into those. We always find these episodes to be very fun, and therefore our subjective for the day is just putting out the feelers for more questions. What things do you want us to talk about? What questions do you have about footwear, about training, about injuries, about the cross-section between those things? And we can put those in our bucket of things that we pull from. I should probably use bag because I said mailbag. So we'll put those in our bag that we can pull from at future times. But today we have a list of questions that David and I are going to run through. Excited to talk through them all. So let's just get started. So our first question is from Marissa Runs, and they asked, I use the same models of shoes, she rotates between them, for easy and long runs. Should there be a difference? And I'm assuming she means in the models themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm going to assume your name's Marissa if your handle is Marissa Runs. That's a great question, Marissa. I think it depends. We say it depends all the time. The way I look at it is these shoes are tools, and we say that all the time as well. I think it depends on the goal of your long run and what you're trying to accomplish. For your easy days, the goal is to be easy. And some long runs, at least in my training cycles, some are easy. Some of them are time on feet where you're just going out and you're running for 2.5 hours, 2 hours, whatever it is. And in that situation, they can totally be the same shoe. I've had plenty of great runs like in the Saucony Ride 16 or the Topo Cyclone 3, just normal daily trainers that I do my shoes in. Saucony Triumph, I've had some solid long runs in. However, like a day like today, I had a 90-minute tempo in the middle of the long run. And so I probably don't want to be doing tempos in those shoes. Like, could you? Sure. But like, if I have the means to have another shoe, I will probably choose another shoe. So that would be my answer for that one. But if the goal is just time on feet and getting out there and having a long run, then I think it's totally doable to have the same shoe for both of those.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think this question comes from, I don't know if they've been following us for a while, but there's a study out there about shoe rotations and how that may influence injury risk. It came out in 2016, and there haven't been any studies that I know of that have come out that have replicated the findings. But what they found in this study is that if somebody is using their primary shoe less than 59% of the time, it can decrease the injury incidence in the time period of that study by 30, I think it was 31%. So you can have basically a third decrease in injury incidence by rotating shoes. And in that study, they did have two different models. So it's not like they were rotating between two pairs of the same shoe. But what I don't know for sure in Marissa's question is if they're asking, hey, I rotate between a lot of different shoes for some of my workouts and stuff, but for my easy runs and my long runs, can I use the same thing? So for me, if I were in a position where I was buying my shoes, just to be frank, because we're getting sent a lot of things for test, what I would do this year is I would have a pair of Nova Blasts that I would use for my easy runs because I like them for that, and I would use them for my long runs because I've enjoyed them for that too. So I'd have a Nova Blast 3, even one pair that I just use for both of those, but then I would have a second different model that I would use for workouts or other types of runs during the week just to get a true rotation. Because the idea right now, operating theory on why shoe rotations help, is that it's a slightly different stimulus underfoot. So it slightly varies the amount of stress or strain on the structures under your foot and in your body. And so to get the benefits of a shoe rotation, you need more than just giving the foam a break by using the same model for everything. But it's really saying find two types of shoes, do different models that you enjoy so that you get a slightly different stimulus. But if you're already doing that, then I would say using the same model for your easy runs and your long runs, if they're both comfortable at those paces, go for it. Do you agree with that, David, or anything to add on to that?
No, I agree. And I think the way I interpreted Marissa's question was because we have the question here written out and in parentheses, we see rotate. And so I'm assuming there's already a rotation of some kind there. And the question is doubling the easy and long shoe. Yeah. So I'm guessing for those workout days, there's something else. And for the race days, there's probably something else.
Yep.
So that was kind of my assumption upon answering that question. And in doing so, I feel like we are both on the same page there. I agree.
Yep. And my take too is like, I think there's a lot of versatile shoes out there that can do the easy runs, that can do some workouts for you. Like you mentioned the Cyclone, like that shoe you could have for everything. And so if you had two do-it-all shoes, there's your rotation. Use them for your long runs, use them for your easy runs, use them for your tempos. There isn't like a magic formula that we know right now. It's more find a couple shoes that you like, use them for what you like them for. We have some more questions later down that we're going to ask, that people are asking, what are these shoes for? What are they similar to? And some people's going to like one shoe for one thing. Somebody else is going to like it for another. Like, I think a good example is, David, you've liked the Kinvara like 12. I remember that for long runs. Oh, like that was your like long run monster. And that just doesn't work for a lot of other people like myself. But I think that's a good example where it's like, don't be afraid to use what works for you for something it's not advertised for, or something that we or other people reviewing shoes say that it's necessarily for. We try to be helpful in helping people determine what works for certain categories, but it's our experience. As much of a clinical background as we have, it's still our experience. But anything else to add on this question?
No, I think by even like what you just said, the experience, and every body is different. Everybody's biomechanics are different. Your experience may be different than ours, and that's totally okay. And knowing that the shoe that works for you is the shoe that you're going to go and take out on that day probably anyways. If you're doing a 20-mile long run, you probably don't want to run in a shoe that you don't like. So with that little bit, take the shoes that you like and continue to use them. And I think it is healthy to have a rotation. And I think, 2-3 shoes is probably all you need.
Yeah. I think another consideration is thinking about, is there something to be said about using multiple different kinds of shoes for your long runs? Like, is there a rotation of rotating long run shoes? And in terms of like research evidence, there isn't really anything there to define how you should actually implement a rotation. Right now it's as simple as using your primary shoe less than 59% of the time. That said, I think when you think about what should I use for my long runs and should I rotate shoes, I do think that's where you start to think about what am I going to race in? And if your racing shoe is going to be the same as your training shoe, then I would just use your training shoe to get used to that and be comfortable. But if you are going to do a race in a different type of shoe, I would say get a couple of your long runs in that shoe that you plan to use on race day so that you feel comfortable in it, you feel mentally confident. I think that's where considering shoe rotations for the actual long runs might be beneficial. But I don't think that there's enough percentage mileage in a week to say you need to rotate which shoe you use for a long run. All right. We are ready for the next question. This is from Jason Villacampa, and they're asking for a comparison question. And I'm going to pitch this one to David because I have not ran in one of these shoes. But they are asking Mach X or Endorphin Speed 3, looking for a speed workout shoe / race day shoe for a half. So maybe, David, give us a little breakdown of the Mach X, since we haven't talked about that much or at all on here yet. And obviously just give us a little background on the Speed 3 and then your comparison between the two.
Totally, yeah. I mean, looking at the Mach X, I don't have any specs on me. It's a shoe that we just got. I mean, thankfully, I have, 27-ish miles on the shoe so far. I mean, I just got it this week, so it's still pretty fresh. But this is the Mach X. So Hoka essentially is doing a rocker profile. They're putting a plate in the shoe. It's very rigid. I mean, like I can bend it, but like this thing is pretty rigid. And it just follows that platform. It's got a good amount of sole flaring through the forefoot, a heel. I mean, it's essentially a built-up Mach with a slightly softer topsole, and then a plate, and then an actual outsole versus the rubberized EVA. So they're trying to make a little bit more of a, I guess you could say, responsive Mach X for workouts, those types of things.
I just pulled up specs so I could run through them really quick.
Perfect.
So the weight in a men's size 10 is 9.4 ounces or 266 grams. The women's size 8 is 8 ounces or 227 grams. Just Hoka has switched their sample sizes, so just keep in mind that most time men's and women's are reported in men's size 9 and women's size 7. So you might see a little bit higher number here than you'd expect from other models that are reported in things like what we produce on our website. So again, 9.4 ounces, 266 grams for men's size 10, 8.0 ounces, 227 grams for women's size 8. The stacks are different between men's and women's. The men's stack is 39 millimeters in the heel and 34 in the forefoot. Women's is a little lower, 37 in the heel, 32 in the forefoot. And then, like you said, they have the PIBA and the EVA, so it's that dual density, and coming in at $180.
Yeah. And I feel like that's pretty comparable with my experience. It feels pretty high up. The plate's noticeable. The weight does feel heavier than the previous Mach, like the Mach 4. Actually, someone literally asked me today, point blank this morning, and they were like, what do you think of the Mach X compared to the Mach 4 or Mach 5? And I was like, it's honestly, it feels a little bit heavier, but I do kind of, at least I had one run in it up until this point. I did 21 in the shoe this morning, so that's how I got my 27. But I was like, I only have one run in it so far, but it feels a little bit higher up. It feels a little bit heavier, but the plate and the foam do feel a little bit more responsive. With that said, I think that natural transition you get in the Mach 5 is taken away a little bit by how rockered this shoe is and how stiff the plate is. So it feels like something that would be nice for a long rhythmic effort. And essentially that's what today was. And today I had a 90-minute tempo, but I referenced earlier that was this morning. And so it was 2 hours and 15-ish minutes of running with a 90-minute tempo. And for me, marathon pace, I mean, I don't know what it would be right now. It's probably like 5:30-ish. And we did it at 5:45 average. And so it's like, I don't know, just a little bit off of that pace where it's a controlled but still fast enough where you're working. And it did great for that. Like I actually really like it for kind of like a controlled rhythmic but still up-tempo type of effort. Mm-hmm. Looking at the Endorphin Speed 3, I actually think there is a difference between the experience of these shoes because running like fast, this isn't really, this being the Mach X for the listeners, I don't really think I'd want to run fast in this. I don't think I'd want to go on the track or do mile repeats or any of those types of efforts in the Mach X. I think this really is going to shine more as a long effort shoe, whether it be a long run or a straight up tempo, whether it's 5 to 10 miles or more or beyond, whatever. But I don't really see it being in that wheelhouse of shorter reps. I think this is really going to shine more as kind of like that performance trainer, leaning more on the trainer side, but still having performance-esque components. Hopefully that answers the question for the Mach X.
Yeah, I got a couple questions off of it too, just because, like I said, I have not ran in the Mach X. And I also have some specs just to remind people for the Speed 3. The weight for size 9 is 8.1 ounces or 229 grams, or 7.2 ounces and 204 grams for women's size 8. The stack is 36.28, so there's a little bit higher drop there, statically measured. What do you? My big questions for you are like, how does it feel from like a bending stiffness side of things? Like, does one feel like it operates more on the rocker, more flexible? Which one gives you more of that bounce? Like, how would you define those differences?
Yeah, and I was about to get into that once I started speaking about the Endorphin Speed 3. The Mach X is stiffer. The Mach X feels like it relies more on that rocker geometry. It really wants you to get into a rhythm. And the Endorphin Speed 3 having the nylon plate, like it's just a lot more flexible. Like you can bend this thing pretty easily. It's got some rigidity and it's got some pop to it, but it's more flexible. And actually for faster efforts, I actually like that. I mean, you mentioned the Topo Cyclone earlier. That's a shoe that's very flexible up front, but it still has a P-back midsole. It's one of my favorite shoes on the planet right now. And I can rip things on the track. I can do whatever I want in that shoe. And I think of shoes like the Adidas Takumi Sen 9. You know, it's a racing shoe, but it's more flexible up front than all of these other shoes that we're looking at. And a lot of them, when they're looking at this metabolic efficiency or how they're operating, they want it to settle into this rhythm, have this rocker, make you work less hard. But that's also for longer periods of time at a submaximal effort, right? And so when you want to go for a maximal effort, the goals change. And so I think you notice with a lot of these flats, when they're designing for shorter distances, some of them are omitting plates altogether, or they're putting a more flexible plate, or they're putting a little shank in there, like the Streakfly had a little shank, right? Mm-hmm. And then Takumi Sen had the plastic rods. The Cielo Road, I don't believe, has a plate. The Saucony, oh my goodness, why am I blanking? And I love that shoe too. Why am I blanking?
I'm blanking too.
It's right there. It's literally right there. I'm looking at it. Oh, I'm so sorry, Andrea. Oh my God. The Saucony. Sinister. Saucony Sinister. No plate.
Nailed it.
Yes. So, yeah. So they have a little bit more flexible designs because it lets you lever off of your foot the way your foot likes to do it. And it doesn't get in your way with doing that. And could that fatigue your calves a little more? Sure. But you're not going as far. Mm-hmm. And so, with that in mind, the Endorphin Speed 3 does come off being a little bit faster. And it's a full P-Bax midsole. The plate's a little bit more flexible. It does feel a little bit lighter on the foot. The stack's a little bit lower. You feel a little closer to the ground. It's a shoe that, like, if I had to do mile repeats or go on the track with, I could do it, you know? And I think it's one of those more versatile options where, like, it can do a little bit of everything pretty darn well. And people use it for their marathon racers all the time, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think if I had to choose between a fast workout session, I would go Endorphin Speed 3. And based on the question, I mean, was it looking for a speed workout shoe / race day shoe for a half? And I think it just based off of no other context, I think if I had to choose between these two, I'm going to go Endorphin Speed 3. I see the Mach X more as a training companion. And I see it as a really solid shoe for long efforts. But I don't see myself lacing it up for something where I'm truly trying to run fast. And I probably would choose something else over the Endorphin Speed 3 personally. But if I'm deciding between those two, I would lean Endorphin Speed 3. And I think another shoe that would be worth bringing up that I feel is in the same category. I mean the Topo Cyclone, but... But I would say the Adidas Adios 8. And so lightweight shoe, you have Light Strike Pro from basically the front half of the shoe. It's fully embedded. You've got good continental traction. It's lightweight. You have flexibility, but still some rigidity by having that like rod that goes through there. I can hammer hill repeats. I can hit the track. It can be a short distance racer. Like, I think they made a good change from what the Adios was. And they kind of went back to its roots a little bit because the Adios used to be the racing shoe for Adidas. You know, before, I mean, the Takumi Sen too, but like the Adios has always been a racing shoe first. And I feel like it started getting a little bit more trainer-like, and they kind of beefed it up. And then it almost like lost its racing appeal. And I think they wanted to kind of revamp that. And they stripped it down. They made it lighter. They made it faster. And I think that really comes across in the Adios 8. Not that this is a plug for the Adios 8. I like all of these shoes. Yeah. But I think that could be another option, especially if you like a little bit more of a firmer feel underfoot, because that also is what this comes down to too. If you like a soft, bouncy feel, that those P-Bax midsoles that you see in the Endorphin Speed 3, that you see in the Topo Cyclone, New Balance Rebel, any of those kinds of shoes, you're going to have a much softer underfoot experience. So if you want something that's a little bit firmer, the Adios 8, I think, delivers pretty well in that category. And the Mach X is a little bit of a hybrid of both, but it just doesn't feel as fast to me.
Yeah. So from what it sounded, you kind of said what your pick would be. And then I also hear you saying for somebody, if you're looking for a half marathon or workout shoe that is very like rhythmic and steady, and stiff, Mach X direction. If you're looking for more versatile, maybe something that you can actually like push in a little bit more, give it a little bit more effort, feel like you're doing a little bit more with the shoe, speed 3, kind of that differentiation. Cool. And then obviously the other options that are a little bit lower, a little bit more ground feel, but still giving you enough protection for that stuff if you wanted to go that route.
Totally.
Cool.
All right. I think I got the next question, right? Looking at the schedule here. Okay. Let me see here. We're talking, we got another comparison to the Endorphin Speed 3. Juicy. All right. So this question, people love the Endorphin Speed, man.
Yeah.
All right. So a question we got here is common. So not from a specific individual. This is one that's come from multiple people. So we don't have a specific handle to give a shout out to here. But the question is, can you compare the Kinvara Pro to the Endorphin Speed? And what shoes are the Kinvara Pro similar to?
Sure. So I'll be kind of the guy on this one because you haven't ran in the Kinvara Pro yet. But I have about 75 miles in my Kinvara Pro. And I would say the Pro and the Speed are very, very, very different underfoot experiences. Like you just talked about what the Endorphin Speed feels like, and I don't have much to add to that. And I only have my Run Shield version left, but it's a great
banger
upper
shoe. I will never
so
give that away. That is like my go-to, like in the rain, go fast, whatever. Yeah,
it's the best on the one thing. It's the best for winter workouts for me when it's really cold out too. It's just is amazing. The only thing is I would love it to just modify the outsole just a little bit. For traction.
I think I said the same thing. Yeah,
it's not the point of the conversation, but with the Speed 3, it does feel so lightweight underfoot. You get that full like a bouncy, softer feel underfoot. You get that whole thing here, and it does have some flexibility to it, and you can feel all of that in the Speed 3. The Kinvara Pro is extremely stiff. This is a very stiff forefoot. It's got a 3/4 length plate, but it starts here and moves forward. So in terms of what you feel in terms of flexibility, that it's going to be stiff through the whole forefoot. So you're operating off of that rocker platform, and it does run a bit firmer than the Speed 3, and that's partially because most of the undercarriage in the dual density midsole is power run. So you get that firmer bottom feel with a little bit of softness on the top, because on the top you have a thick insole of Power Run Plus, but then you also have the PB that's sandwiched between those two things. So ultimately, in terms of like just what it feels like cushioning wise underfoot, the Kinvara Pro is notably firmer in comparison to the Speed, and more stiff in comparison to the Speed, because you do have a full carbon plate, or a 3/4 length carbon plate, but full through the forefoot. And so you really operate off of this rocker, which also, if you compare the two, is a bit more aggressive. You can just, if you're watching, you can see that it seems like there's a bit more of an angle on the Pro, Kinvara Pro. I feel like I have to keep saying Kinvara because there's also the Endorphin Pro.
Fair. So yeah, I mean with Saucony, when you say the Pro, most people probably think Endorphin Pro.
Pro. I also think this isn't also the question, but we had the Saucony team on last week. It was good to hear their explanation of why they called it Kinvara Pro, because it's so different than the Kinvara. I also think it leads to some confusion about the utility of the shoe, potentially, or at least for what I found that I like it for, and what they said, and even what they said that it functions best at, because it has the Pro title, but in terms of like what I enjoyed using it for most, it was not race efforts. Long run shoe, like I took this on a 16 and a half mile run last weekend, and I was going really easy, and that's where I just fell into rhythm and felt like the shoe just had tons of cushioning, rolled really nicely with my mechanics. The rocker's positioned really well for me, so it just really works there. And it does give you just enough of a spring, but when I push into it, it doesn't seem to give more back as I give more effort. So because it stays rigid, stays a little bit firmer. Not to say I couldn't get workouts in. I did a pretty solid like 10K effort tempo in this, where I did 3 miles at tempo pace, and it came along for the ride just fine. It did feel it feels heavier, like it feels bottom heavy, which is where the weight is distributed because of the types of foams that are in here. So in terms of the differences, it's really that a little bit firmer, way more stiff, and just not as top end speed ready. It's really, for me, I enjoyed it most at those easier paces. Like when I'm feeling beat up, I'll take out the Kinvara Pro and just go on an easy run, or the long runs. Or if I'm doing a little bit of speed work in there, but nothing long and hard, that I would prefer to use the Speed 3-4. So that's kind of how I compare those two. They're honestly so different that I wouldn't really be like, oh, I'm really between these two shoes because they're similar. They sit in very different categories. I'd actually say that the Kinvara Pro is closer to the Shift the Endorphin Shift than it is to the Endorphin Speed. Just because the Endorphin Shift has, here, I actually have it here. Also my Run Shield version. It's got a lot of foam underneath. So it still has a lot. I think this one, when they got to the 3, they had a 40 mil stack.
Yeah, I think so.
And because it was so thick and because it's all power run, the forefoot was also pretty stiff. So you were still operating off of this rocker. And in terms of run experience and what I gravitated towards using it for, the Shift was my long run shoe. And funny enough, like the longest run I've done in both of those shoes was the same route. So it's this like beautiful run along this creek, and it's got, for our area, the most elevation I can find. But so I've taken them both on the same like route, and I just remember them feeling pretty similar in terms of rhythm and using that forefoot rocker, just because they have a similar bending stiffness profile. They both sit on the slightly firmer end. The Kinvara Pro is definitely softer than the Shift, and it has a little bit less structure to it, and it can definitely go faster than the Shift could for me, and you have a little bit more responsiveness, but they sit a little bit more similar in terms of ride. The other shoes that I think sit in a similar camp as the Kinvara Pro are and I haven't tested the newest version, but the original SC Trainer, because they both are a little bit heavier. They're both very maximally stacked, and they have a very stiff rocker with this, forefoot, and they're geared for that kind of like long runs, training runs, that kind of thing. So I think those two are very similar. And then in terms of stack height, the Super Blast is probably the other shoe that's worth comparing to the Kinvara Pro, though they feel different. Like I feel like I could I've considered using the Super Blast for a half marathon race, because it is much lighter and it feels lighter and it feels bouncier. It doesn't have a plate, but it's still very stiff. So I think, the Super Blast has a little bit more top end speed capabilities, but they both can do that kind of long run, feel cushioned. This one the Super Blast is definitely softer and slightly more flexible. But it's also, what is it? $45 more, because I think that the Kinvara Pro is coming in at $180 and the Super Blast is $225. So that's a big difference in price, and they do sit in slightly different categories, because I do think the Super Blast could be used more easily for me for like both training and racing, whereas unless I was going to go do an easy effort marathon, I wouldn't pick the Kinvara Pro. So that's a couple of the comparisons I would make to it. Do you have any other comparisons? I know you haven't ran in it, or just ones you're curious about from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's hard to compare when you haven't run it, but I mainly think, based on what it sounds like a high stack, rockered, sharp toe spring, just like geometry driven shoe. And so I would probably picture something kind of like the Hoka Bondi. I'd picture something, and that's probably a little bit heavier. I know the Kinvara Pro is a little bit more of a streamlined design. I think the SC Trainer is a great parallel, just based on what I'm hearing. But, and I have a pair, this is on me. I haven't run in it because with us testing so many shoes, we tend to prioritize certain ones that we're currently reviewing. And it's for only that reason that I haven't run in it. Otherwise, I would actually love to get some miles on it. But
you did make me think of another shoe, though, David, just to bring up in terms of how aggressive the rocker feels. So if you've ran in any of the Glide Ride version, any of the versions of the Glide Ride, that one feels like really fall forward rocker. Like you really can fall off the ledge on that thing. It's not quite as aggressive in the Kinvara Pro. A little bit more measured, a little bit, so like the rocker of, again, the Shift or the Bondi would actually fit kind of the rocker profile of this. This is probably a little more aggressive than the Bondi. But yeah, I think that was another one worth mentioning because it's not like the rocker's so aggressive that you're falling forward like in those Glide Ride, which I think they've discontinued that shoe, which is interesting. But that's kind of where I feel like the Kinvara Pro sits.
Yeah, I think that's great. All right. Well, moving on to our next question. Unless, did you have something?
No, I'm good.
All right. You're making a face there. I don't know. I never know with you. You keep me on my toes. So our next question, we're moving categories now. So we're leaving the endorphin speeds here. We're going to go into something a little bit more clinical here. This question comes from Heavy Dad Lifts. It's a solid handle, by the way. So I hope you appreciate the shout out. But question, doing this Silbernagel Protocol
Silbernagel, yep.
Silbernagel?
Silbernagel, yeah.
Silbernagel, there we go. I was like, Silbernagel, how do you get all out of that? Silbernagel Protocol for Achilles tendonitis. Run before or after Achilles rehab?
Yeah, so I'm curious to get to know this person a little more, like how they stumbled upon this protocol, if they're a rehab professional or if they were recommended it by somebody. But it's funny. So Karin Silbernagel was one of my professors actually in school. And so I know her decently well. And she is a huge researcher in the world of Achilles tendinopathy. So she came out with just for background for people on what this is, she came out with a proposal for how to return to running activities with Achilles tendinopathy. And in conjunction with that proposal for the framework, she also did a randomized control trial where half the people were given this rehab protocol and weren't allowed to run until a certain point, and the other people were given the rehab protocol and were allowed to run within certain parameters, and both groups did the same. So what's exciting about that is if you follow a certain protocol in terms of symptom irritability, it's called the pain monitoring model, you should be able to continue running with Achilles tendinopathy without risk of worsening your condition, and you can have the same amount of improvement. It won't slow your rehab process. So that's kind of a little bit of background. And what this protocol looks like is, again, you have to use the pain monitoring model for your symptoms, which basically says symptoms can't get more than a 5 out of 10 during the activity. And symptoms can be pain or stiffness during the activity, after the activity, the morning after the activity, and you can't have worsening symptoms week to week. So if you type in pain monitoring model into Google, it's honestly pretty intuitive, but it's also nice that it's been validated through ultrasound imaging research. So they basically would look at like the collagen alignment of the tendon as they went through this protocol, and you can use this pain monitoring model to keep your tendon progressing in the right direction. So you had to follow those rules. Then you were given a combination of daily Achilles rehab, and then depending on where you're at in the stage of the rehab, you had a couple days of heavier Achilles loading. So like eccentrics or bounding or just heavy concentric stuff. So this person's basically asking the question, hey, I have these heavier loading days, or I'm doing my daily portion of the rehab. Should I do that before my run, or should I do that after my run? And in terms of the study protocol and how this was developed, you could go either way. So the big thing is not violating the pain monitoring model. My preference on this is to actually get your rehab in prior to the run, especially your daily loading exercises. And part of that is because that daily loading, if you do it even immediately before your run, it just warms up the tendon. So then once you're doing the higher velocity, impact loading of running, the Achilles is a little bit more primed to have that elastic properties that just will keep your soreness at bay. So I really like having runners do the easier part of the protocol, kind of the daily loading, prior to going out on their runs. When it comes to the heavy stuff, I almost say to do that part after, and that's because it's easier. This could go either way, but Most runners, I have them do it after because it can be easier to modify that loading protocol. If your Achilles is a little bit sore, you can either drop the weight or you can drop the reps, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, if you're having to modify your weight and or the amount of reps and sets you're doing, that means you're not getting the most important part of your rehab process. So let's say you go out and you do a 30-minute run and you notice every time you do 30 minutes, you're fine. But then if you do 45, you can't get your loading protocol in. You're not going to get the benefit from the protocol that you would if you could have gotten all of the sets and reps in. So long story short, I like doing the loading after so that people can still feel good on their runs for the heavy loading parts. But if you're having to cut that part short, you have to prioritize the loading protocol in conjunction with your running. It's kind of like priority number 1, get your loading in. Priority number 2, continue running to maintain aerobic fitness. So, I hope that kind of answers the question. It's definitely one of those not one size fits all, but you want to just make sure that you get enough of loading through the Achilles so that it's promoting the changes on the microscopic level that you want to get. And just keeping in mind, I always tell this to runners when they're starting to work on an Achilles issue. The total change of the collagen fibers can take up to 9 months. It's a really long time, 9 months. Like that's a long, long time. Your pain should go away earlier, but you got to continue your rehab process for that whole time. Otherwise, it has a higher likelihood of coming back because you haven't actually created the changes you want to make. So, David, any thoughts on that? Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, that all sounded pretty good. Kind of an intuitive approach from the pain standpoint and just building up strength around the area. I'm all for it.
Cool. All right. So I got a question for you now. Again, we're still talking about Achilles, so kind of a fun little mini topic. But this is from Robin Runs, and there's 2 similar questions. The other one is just run in. So one of the questions, is there an ideal heel drop for runners prone to insertional Achilles problems? And then the second question is thoughts on using a higher drop shoe for insertional Achilles tendinopathy. So maybe give us a little on insertional Achilles tendinopathy, what that means, and then kind of take it from there.
Yeah, so when we speak in anatomical terms, you'll hear the word origin and insertion pretty often. Origin meaning you'll hear proximal and distal a lot too. But origin essentially means closer to the center of your body. So same with proximal, like closer up to the center of your body. So the origin is where it starts, and then the insertion is essentially where it ends. And the way that is defined is from proximal to distal, meaning closer to the center of your body, further away from your body. So when we look at insertional Achilles tendinopathy, the Achilles tendon, most people are familiar with where that is, but that's where the calf muscles insert and create this thick tendon that you can really propel off of. And that comes down through the backside of your heel on that calcaneus bone, and then kind of funnels its way underneath there, and then kind of, in a way, becomes continuous with the plantar fascia there. Not 100% direct there, but like that's kind of essentially the functional translation there. And so insertional, being farther away from us, essentially is down at that lower aspect of the heel. Normally, you would feel this with things that require plantar flexion. So if you're pushing off of it and it hurts, or a lot of times if it's really sensitive, any position where it gets elongated. So if you have to, if your foot and ankle goes up in what's called dorsiflexion, it might yank on that area a little bit, and then it might not feel so good. So that essentially is what insertional Achilles, or the area of the insertion of the Achilles, translates to. So as far as ideal heel drop for runners that are prone to that, that's a hard question to answer. And that's mainly because everyone's so individualized. I'd be doing everyone who's listening a disservice if I said, oh, go run in a 12 millimeter drop shoe, go run in some people will swear by running in 0 drop shoes for the same thing, and some people are like, give it to me in the middle, 5 millimeter. So there's 5 to 8, I think so much of it is dependent on what you feel comfortable with. And in the short term, let's say if it doesn't alter your mechanics too much, if a certain drop feels a little bit nicer to you, that where you can get through your runs and it's not bugging you, that's okay. I'm fine with that. And I've done that before. where I've gravitated towards certain shoes where I'm like, oh, my calf isn't going to hurt if I wear this. It's an easy 5. I'll just wear that. Or easy 10, and just not take any chances and run in something that I know I can trust. With that said, because it is so individualized, I think there's a couple components that you can look for that might modify the load on that Achilles. When you look at it from a passive standpoint, if you are in a higher drop shoe, that's going to lift that heel up a little bit higher there, almost kind of like you're wearing some high heels. And that's going to shorten the angle on, it's going to shorten essentially the tension on the Achilles tendon. It's going to increase your plantar flexion angle, but it's going to decrease the amount of stretch that's on the Achilles tendon. And what that can do is that can actually take some pressure off of it, standing, walking, living life. I've done that before where I've worn like a Brooks Adrenaline or a Mizuno Wave Rider or some of these higher drop shoes out there, just walking around for the day. And that has anecdotally has helped me before. From as far as choosing it for a run, I've done the same thing and it's done okay for me, but that's not the case for everybody. Some people slam down on the foot and then they end up planting off of that forefoot even harder. And so, and for further context too, we do have a full episode on all of this. I don't actually know the episode number. I think Nate's currently working on getting that. If I'm reading his facial, yeah. if I'm reading him correctly, his body language. But everyone's so individualized. Some people respond better to having a toe spring up front in the shoe, having a more rocker profile to the shoe, where their calves don't have to work quite as hard, but the drop might actually be a little bit lower and that stack height's a little bit higher. And so those are two wildly different designs that can both take pressure off of the calf area and in the Achilles insertional area as well. Now, with that said, some people also don't do well with one or the other, like because of that sensitivity, some of those dorsiflexion moments. Some might make you go through a larger range of motion. So I really hate to be the guy that says it depends, but I would try and put a couple shoes on. And if your body feels okay with it, honestly, I'd probably just go with the one that feels okay for that day. And truth be told, depending on how... I know it's prone to insertional Achilles problems, so this could be implying that you don't have any problems currently and you're trying to avoid having problems in the future because you've had on and off problems to that region. I think the greater answer here is to do some strengthening, work around all the muscles, find someone that can help you out with avoiding injuries to that region in the first place. Make sure you're eating well, make sure you're sleeping well. And don't get injured, and I know it's easier said than done, but in the situation that if you do have it, I think it would probably be wise to stick with something that feels okay for your own body and your own mechanics. I don't think I can sit here behind a microphone and tell you go put this shoe on and that it'll go away.
Yep. I agree with you there. First, I failed to find the episode, so I can't tell the number right now. Man.
No.
It might be 70.
VJ said 70. Homie Casper is back.
Yeah, so it might be episode 70, we hope. But I think you hit it, David. One of the modifications in the rehab process for this is taking you out of positions where there is compression of the tendon itself against the bone. And so what Dave was talking about with changes in the drop and changes in the amount of strain put through the calf, meaning the amount of force it has to produce. If you can decrease some of those things for a season, that can help. But there's also, in that episode that we recorded, Matt was talking about how some people have compression issues when it comes to their Achilles. So if you have a high drop, that can sometimes exacerbate it, which is where some of that nuance, like you said, David, comes in where, maybe go try something with a higher drop or a nice rocker that matches you well. But if you're noticing that right away, it's causing that irritability, maybe not the one you're going for.
And one thing we didn't talk about at all, too, is just the construction of the heel collar and heel counters and things like that might irritate it from an external standpoint. I know Klein is very sensitive to those things. Thankfully, I'm not that sensitive to those types of things.
Yep, same, mostly.
But there are people that are. And who knows, maybe it has nothing to do with drop at all. And it's just chronic irritation and rubbing to the area. So I wish I could tell Robin runs and just running, a more straightforward answer, but it does depend. And we're so individualized that, like I said, I'd be doing y'all a disservice if I set a specific shoe for y'all.
Yep. And just to confirm, it is episode 70. It's called Can I Run Through an Achilles Tendon Injury? And we actually talk further through the pain monitoring model in that episode as well. So if you want some more details, you can jump back to that. And that was a while ago, so who knows? A lot of people listening probably hadn't heard that episode. So could be worth going and checking out. Okay, next question for you. We're exiting the Achilles region. We're just going into general questions that we got. And this is from Karav Introverta. I think I said that right, hopefully. Their question is, how much proteins per kilogram is useful for a runner?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, right? Because everyone always talks about recovery, nutrition, make sure you're doing all those little things right, but no one really ever defines what those little things are. The number that I've always heard has been about 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. Before recording this episode, we did look at this question. I looked it up on the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Thankfully, I was consistent with what they had.
You were on, man. You had
I was within a 0.1. They had 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. And what a kilogram is in the metric system, or not, whatever, the European, I don't know. Conversion. Oh man, math is hard. But it's 2.2 grams, or my goodness, 2.2 pounds to 1 kilogram. That's how that translates. So if you're lifting kettlebells, a lot of times those are in kilos. Sometimes rarely you'll see plates in kilos, at least here in the US, but people refer to things in kilos sometimes. So I'm just going to do a quick little calculation here. Let's just say you have a 150 pound individual and you divide that by 2.2, they're roughly 68.18 kilograms. And so if we're on the lowest end of this, let's say it's 1.4 grams per kilogram, you're looking at 95 grams of protein per day. And so if we're looking at a basic 3-meal system, breakfast, lunch, dinner, not counting any snacking or any other supplementation or anything like that, I mean, you're looking at a solid 31 to 32 grams of protein every meal. And so it's a lot, and I think people, it can be a little humbling sometimes to be like, oh crap, I got to eat more, and I mean, we'll put a couple of specifics here. We did kind of list out a couple things, but when you look at like an average serving of protein, people usually imply about 20-ish. When you look at a Cliff Bar, just a basic supplement with, I want to say most Cliff Bars are right around 40 grams of carbs and 10 grams of protein. So if you're looking at it from a protein standpoint, 10 grams of protein, you need 3 Cliff Bars at least, just to cover the basic, like subpar level,
In one of the meals.
In one of the meals, right. Yeah. Which can be kind of hefty, right? And if you're looking at most protein bars, the basic Costco ones are right around 20. Most companies are right around 20. Every once in a while, you'll see some that are upwards of 30. I think Pure Protein, I think their drinks go upwards of 30. Orgain, I think, is like 18 or 20. I think Muscle Milk's about 20. But most companies kind of center it around 20. And so if you're looking at that, I mean, that's 1.5 of those things in a sitting. And those are pretty dense, right? But they're easy calories to put down. And if you're in a time crunch, it's something you could at least get in. But they also tend to bias one thing, and that's protein. So you still have to get carbs, you still have to get fats. But in terms of looking at this strictly from a protein standpoint, we're looking at a little over 30 grams per meal. If you're a 150-pound individual. If you're lighter, then you can get away with less. If you're heavier, then you need to eat more. But looking at it from that standpoint, usually if you centerpiece a protein, like let's say a chicken breast, a steak, something like that, a single ounce, around 6 ounces, you should cover it. I mean, it'll be about 25 to 30-ish, depending on what you're eating for that small serving size. Salmon is about the same there. Sometimes it can even be a little bit higher. It's always kind of tricky with some of those data values because what is uncooked versus cooked does change, right? Because you cook certain things out, it gets a little smaller. Hard to say. But give or take, I mean, if you center at least one solid protein in each of those meals, you should be okay. But that also implies that you have 3 solid meals. And a lot of Americans aren't doing that either. And for good reason. We have a lot of time constraints and things like that, and supplementation can certainly help. One thing that I would like to bring up too, because in the American breakfast system, we eat a lot of eggs. I eat a lot of eggs. And an average egg is about 6 grams of protein. You have 4 eggs, that's 24. So most people are like, oh, I'll have 2. And it's like, well, that's 12. It's a Cliff Bar. It's like, that's not much. So I think what I want to drive home with this question is just don't be afraid to eat. Don't be afraid to snack. If you're running a lot and you're putting that work in, your body is working hard. I mean, the average person, I want to say the number is right around 0.8 grams per kilogram, and that's on the higher end for someone who's not exercising. And for most sports at the highest, they're usually about 1.5. So why is it that running is so much higher? It's comparable with bodybuilders or someone who's doing heavy strength training all the time. It's the muscle breakdown. You're intentionally going out there and you're breaking your muscles down we take running for granted, but that's a single leg jump over and over and over again for miles. And our bodies do take punishment from that. And there's a lot of breakdown that comes along with that. And that's why the protein needs are as high as they are. So I think that's a great question, and I'm glad that we could answer that here on this podcast. But yeah, with that said, I think the take-home message isn't so much like hyper fixate on how much you're getting. I don't think that's the answer either, because if you're constantly getting stressed out about how much you're getting in, and that's not good food eating behavior in itself, and that can lend itself to much more serious things, and I think the big thing that I want to drive home is don't be afraid to eat. And you can still go on with your life, but just do not have any fear of that plate.
Yep.
It's energy at the end of the day. Calories are what we use to turn over into ATP and energy to keep us moving, as well as keep our brain functioning on top of just actual movement and performance. So don't be afraid of food.
And I think you mentioned it at the beginning. We're not, registered dietitians.
Actually, I didn't. I meant to, but yeah.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay. Well, I imagine.
Yeah, not a registered dietitian, not a nutritionist. But I do have a background in that realm. But I'm not certified or licensed in that world.
Yeah. And the point of bringing up all the examples that David brought up, we kind of ran through some in the beginning just to have the point was to give it a tangible picture of how much it is, not to say this is what you should eat. It was not a prescription in that way. I think there's a couple people that I like to follow who are registered dietitians who kind of use their social platforms to share information. One of them is Courtney Burling. So her Instagram handle is eatwell.runbetter. I think she does a great job, especially speaking to women who have complicated relationships with food and what it looks like to be a runner and try to engage in fueling your body in a way that gives you the fuel you need to run. I think she does a fantastic job. And then Megan Featherston, she does stuff with Believe in the Run as well. She has a really nice platform as well with really good, reliable information. So those are 2 people that I would recommend checking out. They talk about a lot of this kind of stuff and they're both registered dietitians who work with athletes. So I recommend checking them out for sure.
Yeah. And I think totally one quick little caveat on that too is I think this goes along with don't be afraid of food. But when you look at a lot of carb loading protocols, they allow liquid carbs and it's fine. Your body processes it. You're putting a lot of hard work in like juices or even things that have corn syrup and things like that. I'm not a big component of eating it all the time, but something is certainly better than nothing. And so making sure that you just get your macronutrients in a way that's manageable for you, I think is absolutely huge in the recovery process and just keeping you operative, just keeping you functioning, that's so important. But anyways, we will move on. So next question, this one is for Nathan. This is coming from Wivinen. Almost sounds like an Eevee evolution from Pokemon. But the question is it hard to manage the balance between work, DOR, running, family?
It's a great question. It's something I actually think about a ton. But before I do go into it, you brought up Pokemon, and my nephew was in town, and he's in a huge Pokemon stage. He's like 9. Oh, he's 10 now.
Let's go.
But he kind of introduced Pokemon to my kids, and so my oldest is 6, or he's going to be 6 next month, and my youngest will be 4 next month. And now they're like, they just can't stop talking about Pokemon, which is fun for me because Pokemon was my jam growing up, and it came out at like the perfect time for me. But what?
Totally. And like not to make this podcast about Pokemon, I grew up playing a lot of Pokemon as well. And then I remember when the Nintendo DS came out, I never got it. So pretty much everything up to the Game Boy Advance, I put hours and hours and hours into those games, multiple level hundreds, all that. And I took a long hiatus, and I recently got a Nintendo Switch earlier this year, and it kind of rekindled it and started playing some games. Fun fact, on the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you can actually play online with people and get a little party together. Yeah, so if you want to go get a Switch, this is my pitch to get Nathan a Switch. So for those in the comments,
we can play games together.
We can play games together, yeah. And if you wanted to have your boys on there and we're just talking Pokemon, we could do that. That could be a thing. So
that segues really well into how I manage the balance of all these things. There's so much that goes into this question, though. I think that there's a couple unique things about DOR, and I think that the type of people that are on this team, so Andrea, Bach, BJ, Matt, David, we are all on the same team. We know that this is genuinely for our passion to share this stuff with people. It's for fun. We try to have fun doing this, and we know that this is not a huge part of what keeps our families running. This is supposed to be something that's life-giving to us, and we give each other a lot of grace to go do what we need to do, and actually push each other to take time off from DOR. So I think I that's how I feel. I don't know if you feel the same, David.
No, I agree completely on the DOR side of things. I mean, we're probably telling each other to work less more often than we're telling each other to work more.
Right.
Because I think we all have personalities, and we've worked hard to get where we are. I'm not going to, beat around that. We have worked hard, and I think we're all hardworking individuals. With that is also the curse of constantly working hard. And I think it's very important to have another person in the room to look at you and say, chill. You're fine. Go eat a taco. Shut up. And then take a quick break and come back when you're ready. And I think we do a good job of divvying things up and being open to each other, because it does take, I think we all have open personalities where we want constructive feedback. And sometimes the most constructive feedback that you can get is to just take a break. And not necessarily because there's a performance decline, but because some of those other things that were mentioned in that question might be going not off the handle, but where the balance starts becoming hard. Yeah.
Yep. And I think for me, the way I approach this, just to let you into my world, which I've shared a bit. So, I'm married to Jana. We have 2 boys who are 6 and 4, who one just finished 4K, but Henry will be in kindergarten, and Ray's not in school yet. So that's just a certain specific phase of parenting. And then right now I'm in this weird work phase where I'm a part-time clinician. I'm an adjunct faculty at our university here in town. And I'm in grad school. So I'm getting my degree in educational sustainability. So, and then I'm doing Doctors of Running as well. So I have kind of a lot of different pieces that are trying to find their way into my schedule. And I think from a big picture standpoint, what I have to do is on the front end, I've worked really hard to set what my priority list is. And so in terms of those time demand things, I know like which ones sit on top for me. Like for me, from the list I just gave, and there's other things that I give time to. I just haven't listed them all, but like time with Jana and then followed by time with our boys and investing in those hit the top of my priority list by 1,000,000. So if I want to know if I'm actually prioritizing those things, I look at my calendar and ask, am I actually dedicating more time to those things that are flexible times? Like, yeah, you might have a 9-to-5 job or something, but like for me, it's, am I dedicating like the free time that I have actually to those things? Or am I choosing to insert more Doctors of Running work, or insert more teaching prep for the university, or insert more work on my dissertation into those times that could be used for what I claim, quote unquote, to be my top priority? That's kind of how I work through managing that. And I work really hard to make sure that actually gets my time and attention. And then everything else has to be good enough. And at the same time, accepting any consequences that might come from taking less time towards those things. So when it comes to Doctors of Running, it's one of those things for me that's on the table as a huge negotiable, where if our life changed to a place where I couldn't give time to it, I would just freely have to let it go. And I would be very comfortable doing that. And Jana and I check in with each other often, monthly, to ask, are we still in a good spot with how much time I'm giving to Doctors of Running, recording this podcast, writing things on the side, whatever. And if it's too much, this would have to go off to the side. The same would be true about my job at the university, or my job at the clinic or with the running lab, and my school. Like, do I need to put school on a pause? So we do an inventory of the time that I've put into those things, and then how is our family, what I claim to be my top priority, doing? So I would say we're in a really, for me, like, is it hard right now? No, I think we're in a really good rhythm. Is it hard to do that on the front end and like really, because sometimes it takes big overhaul to like switch it to what you really want your priorities to be. That's really hard. But because of the nature of a lot of the places that I'm working right now, including Doctors of Running, it gives me that freedom to prioritize the things that are actually priority. So that was probably more of an answer than I needed to give, but that's kind of how I approach it. So let's move forward. I got another question for you. We have a lot left. We're already over an hour, so maybe we'll just cut a little bit short. But I do want to ask you this one, David. So Faye F. Cooper is asking, foot shaped versus non-foot shaped shoes. Any thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially because I've noticed in the last year, there's been a big push towards foot-shaped shoes. I've been seeing it push a lot too, also in the lifting community as well, where people are like, you need your toes to expand. You need to have some space up front. Are they better? I mean, it depends on the individual. Again, I hate to say that, but I will say it's nice to have room for toe splay and have some volume to accommodate for, natural swelling that you will have when you're running. Will that deter me from putting on a Vaporfly when I race? Probably not. Or like not that I'm going to race all my races in Vaporfly. I probably won't actually.
You don't.
But I don't. I've run 2 races in a Vaporfly in the last 4 years. Not a very common shoe to see on my feet. But I just said that as an example of a shoe, right, that normally doesn't fit that profile. Actually, the newest one is a little bit better. But when I think of a foot-shaped shoe, I tend to think Topo first, because they have an anatomical design where they're a little bit more slim through the heel and midfoot, but they widen out for the forefoot and toe box. That's what they try to strive for. Ultra also tries to do something similar, but it tends to be a little bit wider through the rest of it. But with that said, they do take into account that you need some room up front. I will say that the Topo shoes, at least in the last year, and I think some of this has been more design than anything, not so much just the toe box, but I think the whole package of the shoe. They've been putting out some bangers this year. There's been a lot of shoes that I've really been liking from that company. Is that because of the foot shape versus other things? It's hard to say, because there's plenty of shoes that don't follow a foot shape that I've really enjoyed as well, like the Saucony Ride. I wouldn't classify that as a foot shape. That's a pretty traditional running shoe last. And Not that it's narrow through the forefoot or anything. I'd say it's about average. It's just not wide, right? And I don't know if I have any specific like dogmatic thoughts on this matter where I'm like, oh, you have to go foot shaped, you have to go narrow. If you are having issues with that and it's compressing your toes and maybe you're getting bunions or you're getting like this clear pressure or like a numbness, tingling, like your nerves are getting compressed, then I think you probably do need a little bit more space in that area. And that would be a wise decision to increase some of the space in that area. But as far as if you're not having problems with it or any specific shoe part of that design, I think it's probably fine to just wear what you want to wear. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And a couple of the things that resonate in my head about this topic, one of them is I think there's a difference between what shoes you run in and what shoes you wear all day long too. So
very true.
Like,
if you're wearing a tight dress shoe all the time, yeah.
Someone might only run an hour a week, and so what you run for an hour, is that really going to be the biggest impact on what you could, just using the term like foot health, that it could be in terms of things like bunion formation or whatever? And I would claim no. I think, so I do think that it does matter to some degree. Like if you're having something that is pushing your foot one way or another, that can change length tension relationship of muscles, tendons, all that kind of stuff. And like you said, it can lead to compression of nerves or bunion formation. And that's important. If you are running a decent amount, having a shoe that has enough room for splay is good, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily need an anatomic toe box. And it really depends on what your foot shape is and what the shoe is designed like. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I see someone who is very firmly in like the anatomic toe box industry, where they're creating a product or a shoe that like promotes that as the way. What they often do is they show a diagram where they will pretend to like cut out a shoe with an anatomic toe box, and it looks how nice the foot looks in there. Right. And then they'll cut and they'll say it's a traditional shoe, and then it looks like the toes are all curled over each other. And what they're trying to communicate through that is any shoe that's not anatomically shaped is going to compress your foot like this, which is bad for you. If your foot was compressed like it is in those images, yeah, probably not the best shoe for you. But that's not how every traditionally shaped, and I don't know if traditionally shaped, non-anatomically shaped shoe is going to actually do to your foot. If we could cut off the uppers on a lot of these shoes, for me, I know that it wouldn't be pushing my toes. There's literal like space on the sides, just like the half thumb length at the end. I have space on the end. So I know those are not adding that compression that would be unhealthy, depending on how much taper there is around the toe box and stuff. So I think that's from that side of the dogmatic end of it. I get frustrated when they paint all shoes in a certain category for all foot types and all people. But I do think that there's a ton of value in having enough room for your feet display, especially if it's something that you're in a lot. You really want to make sure that you don't overdo it in that kind of a situation all day or running all the time in something that's compressing and potentially causing those issues. But I think the amount of time you're in the shoe matters, and does the shoe actually do what some of these images claim to do? That said, I love the feeling of Topo Fit. The anatomic toe box feels great. So I'm in on it.
They just make nice uppers too. Like
they do.
Just that aside, like the material's nice, lockdown's good.
Yep. I'm excited to hear what people have to say about this, because I do think that this is one of those trigger topics for people that people get really fired up about it. Okay, I have one more question for you, David, and then well, actually, I have 1.5. But
1.5. Okay.
1.5. But the first one I'm going to ask you is from Tim Coleman 0810. What is your bucket list destination race?
Oh, that's a good question, Tim. I don't know. I wish I could give you like, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to race. I mean, ideally Orlando in February, but like that's for very different reasons.
What is that reason for people who might not know?
Oh, that would be the Olympic trials. So that would be a bucket list right there, to go run there for the performance standpoint. But I think I'm at a place in my running journey at the moment. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to, really just get better, focus on the process and get a little bit faster, get a little bit better at the sport. And so a lot of the courses I'm running, a lot of the races I'm running, and actually the race selection this last year could have been better. And I actually had a talk with my coach about that, and going to races that are going to set us up better for some success is kind of the theme going into this next year. I mean, we'll see. I mean, the year's not over yet, and we're going to still try and make a push to make that trials mark. I think that is still doable. But going forward, we're going to probably look at race selection probably for the next year or two. So I don't really have any like bucket list destination race. You know, it's like, I love the idea of a destination race, you know, where it's like, oh, I get to go here and have my vacation and we can build it around this, and I get to go see all these cool things. But the truth of me racing is more for the racing. I mean, so it's, I mean, I wish I could tell you.
I'm just kidding.
It's very boring. It's honestly, it's when it's hilarious because when you look at my running and my training, it's very boring. You know, it's a lot of miles. I do pretty much all, I very, very rarely double. So all of my mileage is off of singles. I run probably 70 to 80 miles a week, you know, so that's averaging at least 10 a day. I have a workout day on the track. I'll have a long run, and I'll have a road workout. Usually it's like, it's a pretty bread and butter, you know, plan there. So, but with that said though, I mean, I've hardly had any time on the East Coast or the Midwest. And I do think Chicago would be a fun race, and that would be a good field and of course to go run fast at. I think it would be fun to go run at New York. You know, I know it's not the fastest course on the planet, but it's a major. I mean, I don't get too hung up on the major thing, but it is a big race and it's going through a major city. And when else are you going to get to run the streets of New York and see the city from that angle? So I do think that's a really cool experience that you could have. Right. But yeah, with that said, I mean, I don't really get jazzed about the location of the race. I wish I did. I don't. Yeah, you know, it's fine. Like there's like the Catalina Trail miler. We got all the Malibu races right here. We've got like there's like so many like cool places. Like there's so many cool places you could go, and like, but even like not outside of here, there's a lot of like wonderful, beautiful places in our country and abroad. You know, that also have great races and cool areas, but. I'm not as driven by the destination. My destination, I guess, in a boring way, is hopefully running fast. You know, the destination of getting there on that journey. Yeah.
I think for me, I've got a couple that I've thought about, and I have some that are silly, like destination. I would love to just run the Madison Marathon because that's a city that I love, went there for school. But when I think about more fun ones, my feasible one that I think I could actually do someday is Big Sur. Looks gorgeous, and I know it's got especially for me, tons of elevation for what I'm used to. Yeah, it's a hilly area, but looks really beautiful and fun. So that's one for me. The other one, this fits in kind of it's one of the majors, but doing Tokyo would be a destination one for me. I've never like actually imagined myself going to Japan, but if I were to like do a destination race, I think I would choose there just to kind of get the same experience of running New York, but in a country I've never experienced before, and getting like the on-ground experience in Tokyo, I think would be really cool. Okay, I've got my last question for you. You ready? This one is from our very own Bach, our media manager. And his question is, you got to kiss, marry, and kill one of the following three. So it's kiss, marry, or kill for you, David. Carnitas, steak, and chorizo tacos.
Fuck, I hate you. Why? Dude, come on, man. Oh, man. He's going to be hearing it from me after this. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. When I think... I'm just going to kill chorizo tacos right off the bat.
Woo!
Nothing against chorizo. Like, I think it's good. I like them with eggs. Actually, I probably put those in burritos more than I do in tacos. It's being the centerpiece of the taco, you know, the protein, what you're wanting to put down. I would just take carnitas or steak over that. I don't know. So I'll put chorizo on the side there. But I think when it comes down to the kiss and the marry here, I think when you're talking Mary, I think you're talking consistency. I think you're talking something predictable. You love it all the time. Maybe you don't some days, but maybe like there will be ups and downs with it. But you're committed to it, and it's something that's consistent that you can rely on. And I think for me, that's going to be steak. I feel like steak, a bad steak taco is still going to be pretty good, and a good steak taco could make your evening. And I think I think for that reason, I'm gonna marry the steak taco, and that's hard for me to say because I love carnitas, like I just love it. But finding a good place that makes carnitas can be hard, and sometimes the bad ones aren't that good. And so I think the carnitas is like that's the kiss. It could go really well. It could not go really well, but you're not committed to it. You know what I mean? And some days are going to be better than others. Whatever. But I'll probably marry the steak tacos.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this mailbag episode. We love digging into your questions. So in light of that, if you've been following along with us, if you'd be willing to take a couple seconds to drop a review or subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube, both of those things really help us out. And then if you want to submit some ideas for podcast episode ideas or questions that you have for us, we are always trying to keep our mailbag growing. And so you can always email us at doctorsofrunning@gmail.com. You can check out our Instagram and send us a message through the direct messages there. In YouTube comments. And then we also are on Threads now. Bach is so happy to have a whole other media thing to manage, but that is a very conversational platform that we've been using. So you can pop over there and enter some ideas for the future mailbag episodes. But thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.